All right. So when we look at themes within Gulliver's Travels, one of the main themes is we have might versus right. Okay, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. Okay, so this book poses the question of whether physical power or moral righteousness should be the governing factor of life. Right. His experiences, he experiences both sides of that equation, by the way. He experiences physical might both as someone who has it when he's with the Lilliputians, and one who does not have it when he is with the Brobdingnagians, right? He's on both sides of that equation, right? But there's also many claims to power based on moral correctness within the book. The whole point of the egg controversy with the Lilliputians and the people of Blefuscu is not just a cultural difference. It is a religious, it is a moral issue related to a proper interpretation of a passage in their holy book. And so that difference of opinion is used to justify, in their eyes at least, the warfare that's sparked, right? This happens every day, right? It's happened throughout all of recorded human history, where people go to war with one another because my book says this and your book says that, and one of our gods has to be right. Okay, I'm just going to leave it at that, right? At the same time, in a similar fashion, the use of physical force against the Yahoos is justified for the Houyhnhnms, right? Because of their sense of moral superiority, right? They're cleaner, they're better behaved, they're more rational, they use logic rather than emotion to make decisions, and so they believe that they are the superior beings to the Yahoo, right? But overall, right, the novel shows us that the claims to rule on the basis of moral righteousness, right, are often as arbitrary and as meaningless as the simple disguises of physical subjugation. For someone to sit back and say, well, God told me that you're supposed to do what I tell you to do because I'm right, I'm his chosen person, is just as meaningless and just as arbitrary as if I held you captive at the point of a sword, right? The only reason that you're doing what I say is out of fear, right? If you believe there's a God in the universe and that if you don't do what that God says, he's going to throw you into a lake of fire and you're going to burn for all eternity, and then someone comes along and says, I am God's right-hand man and he has appointed me through divine intervention or what have you, to be the ruler of this land. If you don't do what I say, then you're disobeying God. Then you're ruling out of fear the same way you would be with a sword, right? So that's kind of what Swift is talking about, right? What he's pointing out, right? Yeah. So the rest of that's that. Then there's the idea of the individual versus society. There's a whole list of stories where characters they travel to non-existent lands. Gulliver's Travels is one of those. Chronicles of Narnia, the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, right, that was on in the 1980s and whatnot. All of those things, right? There's stranger in a strange land tales. That's what they are. That's one of the major themes within literature, is a stranger in a strange land. They explore this idea of utopia, right? Which is an imaginary model of the ideal community, right? The idea of utopia is ancient. It goes all the way back to Plato's Republic, which is a city-state governed by the wise, and then we come forth to Thomas More's Utopia. Um, so he looks at both of those works. He says, "Hey, there they are. Look at these things, right?" But Swift's viewpoint of utopia and his take on utopia is much more skeptical, right? And one of the things that he points out very well through this book, as we've illustrated through this conversation, is that there's a tendency in historical utopias to privilege the collective group over the individual. Okay, so let's say, for example, the children of Plato's Republic, right, are raised communally with no knowledge of their biological parents. Okay, they're raised as a community of children, right? And the understanding that this system enhances social fairness, right? That, well, I don't know who my parents are, you don't know who your parents are, so we're equals on this plane, right? Swift has the Lilliputians similarly raise their offspring collectively, right? But it results in not exactly utopian idea or society, because Lilliput is torn by conspiracies, jealousies, backstabbings, and all those things. So the human failings, the individual failings of humans, begin to infect the community writ large, which is often ignored in those historical treatises about utopian societies, right? The Wenhams also they practice strict family planning, dictating that the parents of two females should exchange a child with a family of two males, so that the male to female ratio is perfectly maintained. They come a little closer to the utopian idea than the Lilliputians do, but there's something really unsettling about the Wenham's indistinct personalities, and kind of how they're a collective. They don't have individual names. So the individual, the society is then the collective is privileged over the individual again, and so he points out that, right. So Gulliver's Travels, by virtue of this, could be kind of described as one of the first novels of modern novels of alienation, basically focusing on his repeated failures, because he keeps going to these different societies, but he can't find a place for himself, right? And he's lost his place in his home society, of being a surgeon, being a doctor, and being an erudite and well-respected person, and he's kind of floundering around trying to find a place for himself, right? He never complains explicitly about any of it. So he's not necessarily, Swift's not necessarily mocking the excesses of communal life, right? As much as he's mocking the excesses of the individual, right? If it weren't for the desires and the excesses of individuals, there are certain excesses of society that simply wouldn't exist, right? Because there has to be a need, there has to be a demand for the thing to be produced, right? If there's no demand for it, then producing the thing will result in just wasted resources and a failure of whatever that business is. So there has to be a need, there has to be a demand, and then there has to be a supply of whatever that is, right? So that's the stuff he's looking at. No, I'm not stoned. If you're here to be a troll, you can kick rocks, okay? So the next thing he talks about, the next piece, is the limits of human understanding. The idea that humans are not meant to know everything, and that all understanding has natural limit, is very important to Gulliver's Travels. He singles out theoretical knowledge, right, and in particular for attack throughout the novel. His portrait of the self-centered Laputans, right, who show blatant contempt for those who are not sunk in private theorizing, is clear satire against those who pride themselves on knowledge above everything else. So practical knowledge is also satirized because especially when it doesn't produce results that are meaningful or useful to the human condition, or increasing the life of humans. So he says that there's realms of knowledge that humans are simply not supposed to venture into. So his depiction of rational society, his depiction of the rational people, right, is either one of ignorance with the Brobdingnagians or one of complete disaffected existence with the Houyhnhnms, right? So the stretching, right, of the human intellect, the stretching of human knowledge into things like astronomy, into chemistry, into things that many clerics would consider to be useless, meaningless, and would not add to human happiness, right? Are things that he says are useless. And so he points out that the people of his novel are illustrating these types of viewpoints within his own society. So he also emphasizes the importance of self-understanding, right? Gulliver in the beginning is lacking of self-reflection, self-awareness, that the emotional ability to process things in a meaningful way. He makes no mention of emotions, that kind of stuff, and he shows no interest in describing his own psychology, right, or that of Gulliver to the audience whatsoever, right. By the end of the novel, he's come to this kind of twisted viewpoint of himself and of other peoples, that he is a Yahoo and everyone around him is a Yahoo. He's actually revulsed by the human condition. So at the end of the novel, the only emotion he shows us is this thinly disguised state of self-hatred, where he's so angry about who and what he is, that he's just constantly in a state of hatred about it. Swift appears at that point to be saying that self-knowledge has its limitations as well, just as theoretical knowledge does, right? And if we dive into our own psyche or our own emotional lives too much, that we may also do exactly what the clerics tell people not to do with science, right? And that is, it interrupts our happy lives. We can't live happily, right? If we can see everything that's wrong, right? There's been several people who've said over the years things to the nature of, I've never seen an educated person who was happy, right? And it's because people who are educated begin to see where the holes are, right? Where the problems and the pitfalls are within societal constructs, whatever those are, whether they're family constructs, whether they're governmental constructs. We begin to see what the issues are with them, and we become increasingly frustrated, right? Because people don't see them, and they can't see them, or they choose not to see them, right? And so that's kind of what Swift thinks. I think that's what he's pointing at, is that if you become too much of anything, right? If you're too emotional, right, it messes with your happy life. If you're too stoic, it messes with your happy life. If you're too educated, it messes with your happy life. If you're not educated enough, it messes with your happy life. So there's a balance that we have to strike between those things, right? And that's where we find our place in society. We have to find our balance within society between family, work, and whatever our personal interests are, so that we can find a balance and we can find happiness within ourselves. But too much of anything is going to lead to us being unhappy. And that's where Gulliver finds himself, right? As he finds himself kind of floating around trying to find a place where he fits. And once he finds that place that he fits, he is rejected because he is the other, right? So that's the conversation around that. If you guys have questions or anything you want to discuss,